Hi everyone, I'm so glad to have you here on my channel. Today we're going to look at 4 different masculine cards. We are going to go over lots of techniques, and this will be an action-packed video with all kinds of things to learn. Lots about heat embossing, stencil techniques, and adding some metallic elements to your project. So I hope that you will stick with me. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. Everything that I'll use will of course be linked in the description below. So let's get started with this video. I'm going to start with the first card that I used some ink blending on, so it's the first one that shows up in the video. This one I used chipped sapphire, prize ribbon, and tumbled glass, and we're making kind of an ombre look to this background. So it's going to have 3 different colors and we're blending them together. So if you don't have any blending brushes, you can do this with the foam daubers if you want. My biggest tip on this is to make sure you use Bristol smooth paper. That makes your ink blending go so much easier, so much less force. I don't know if you remember, but my right arm is actually broken on the top, and so I'm not supposed to put a ton of pressure. So you may see me occasionally switch into my left hand, but with Bristol Smooth, I don't have to press very hard with this brush, which makes all the difference. So if you have arthritis or any other problems, using the correct paper really makes a difference. So I'm going to finish this ink blending, and then we're going to use a stencil over the ink blended area. Here's the final product. I do let this dry for a little bit before I apply the stencil, so I'm going to set it aside for a couple of hours, then apply my stencil. We're using this woven stencil, and I'm using that same mat that kind of helps hold things down. I am going to add water instead of actually stamping with anything or ink blending anymore. We're going to add water with a paper towel and remove the ink. So I started with blotting, but because these lines are so small, I really needed to rub the paper towel, the wet paper towel, in the lines to remove some of the ink. So I went on and taped this down. This mat does help hold things down, but if you're going to be rubbing on very fine lines and you want everything to stay lined up, I would add some washi tape and just be safe. I dampened my paper towel and I'm moving along these lines trying to remove some of the ink, and you can see the ink comes off on that paper towel. As the paper towel tries to tear up, it usually means it's getting a little drier, so I add more water and go along the lines. And I don't know if you can tell through there how that's lightening those, but I'll show you again. There's a lot of ink on this that's coming off, and I don't want it to be a drastic thing. I want this to just kind of be almost like faded blue jeans, you know, just a pattern kind of in the background of this beautiful blue ink blending. So I skipped ahead a little bit and I've done most of the lines, but I want to check and make sure that it's got as much of an effect as I want. So I'm going to lift up my tape and see, and I do like this effect, but I really want to add just a few more lines so that you see them everywhere on this paper. So I'm going to lay my stencil back down, which is pretty easy to do because you can see those lines through it, and I'll take off just a little bit more, then we'll add this to our card. So this final panel does have some little fragments of the paper towel, so I'm going to dust those off, and then we're going to use our powder tool. So I really like this powder tool because so much comes out of it. This one's actually from Cat Scrappiness, and so I'm going to powder everything off, and the reason is because I'm going to heat emboss. I'm going to heat emboss in a different way than you may have seen me do before. So I'm using some water and I'm going to splatter this on the background, and then I'm going to add my embossing powder to the drops of water. I learned this in my Altenew classes, and I just really like the look of having those splatters actually embossed. They're a little bit brighter than using like a metallic watercolor, and it looks really cool. So I'll show you how I did that. So all that water is on this card, little drops, and now I'm going to use my little coffee filter because I like to emboss over a coffee filter just so that I can easily pour off my embossing powder into something and not make a huge mess. And you'll see there's lots of little spots where I got sparkles of water and that stick to it. So you can take a paintbrush now, and if there's a little spot, or I actually used, sometimes I used the little piece of paper towel that I had, and wipe any spots off. You know, they're just water holding it on there, so you're not going to mess your thing up if you decide you don't want some of these on here. So once I've removed some of the dots, I'm using a teeny little paintbrush to get any flakes that are left over, or just any small dots that I had trouble getting a hold of. And then now I'm going to heat it. So I think this looks really cool. I love how these bright gold, and they're kind of raised because it's embossing powder. It just looks really nice on this background. So I'd say give this a try if you've never tried this technique, and then we'll finish making this card. I stamped my sentiment, "You are awesome." I just feel like these label sentiments are really great for men. So I stamped it and just cut it out with my scissors and trimmer. This background paper that's got the stripes to me is very masculine. I really like this black and white. It's from a paper pack of Altenew that has 6x6 paper. So I'm going to add this on, but I feel like I want to bring in that gold somewhere else. So I'm going to cut myself a little small strip of gold foil, and we'll put it next to this. So I'm using my We Are Memory Keepers tool called the Works. I just like a paper trimmer like this when I'm trying to make a very small cut. I feel like I can see where I'm going a little bit better. So I'm just trimming the smallest little bit off of this, and then we're gonna add it to the card front. So we've already glued the back panel and the black and white stripes, and I'm going to add this little strip along the joining area of those, and then we're going to use some of this Altenew metallic thread and our sentiment and complete the card. There's all kinds of ways you can mess with this thread. I kind of like making it in little circles, and so I just kind of twist it around my fingers and just play with it a little bit to try to cover up the ends with my sentiment. So I'm just going to mess with it and put this on top, and then if I am not able to cover an end with the sentiment, I will trim that little end off. Here's the final card. I'm super excited about this one. I just think it looks really fun, and then it works great for a masculine card. So our next card, we're going to use this tie-dyed set. So of the things that I have from Altenew, this is one of the ones that I use often on male and masculine cards. I don't have any geometric shapes, but to me, these little stripes and the tie-dye is similar to that. We talked about this in one of our classes, is that using a lot of geometric shapes and things like that is a good way to make something masculine. Well, this is my take on that. I really like these little stripes that come with the tie-dye set, and we are going to alternate the colors. We're going to start with charcoal gray, and then we're going to alternate it with In the Navy from Gina K. The reason that we're using a Gina K ink is because I have Gina K cardstock that matches In the Navy perfectly. And with this card, I'm going to cut it on an angle so that you'll see the actual card backing. And so I want to make sure that things match appropriately. These stamps aren't necessarily layering, but you see how they're spaced perfectly where you can make the stripes a little closer together. You don't have to overlap them like that, but I really like doing it because I feel like it just makes them the perfect amount of space away from each other, and it looks really cool together. Continued that down the whole panel, and then I finished this front part. This is going to be part of our front panel, but I want to go ahead and get my sentiment ready so we can decide how much of a diagonal we're going to cut with this. So I'm going to be using the Wow Ultra High, and so this is a really thick embossing powder. It's different than usual. I'm going to use VersaMark, and I'm just going to do half of my sentiment. So I really love this look, and learned this technique in one of the Altenew classes. I cut my hello out of the Gina K In the Navy, and then now I'm going to apply this Ultra High, and I'm going to show you this is really large particles. So when you look at it, it looks different than an Ultra Fine. It's definitely thicker particles, and it makes that gold really stand out on this sentiment. So I love watching heat embossing. I don't know why, it's just so fascinating to me. So I left part of this in here so you could see what it looks like. This is a much thicker embossing, so it looks really cool. I love the way it turned out. So now I'm going to go and put together the front of the card. So this right here is how I cut my card. You can cut your card any way you want to. I like doing this because I am right-handed, and I feel like I open cards from the right, and I don't want somebody pulling on the sentiment, and I'll show you what I mean in a minute. I cut another strip of that gold foil paper, and I thought, you know, just to tie my cards together, it would look really nice up at the top of this one. So I'm going to glue those and the front piece on, and then show you what I did with the sentiment. So with the sentiment, I don't know if I forgot to record, but what I did is it has a shadow dye that goes with it, and so I did some vellum behind that embossed navy piece so that it just makes it stick out just a little bit more. Do you see the vellum behind the sentiment? It's very faint, but it looks really cool. For our next card, we are going to layer heat embossing. So with this set, this tie-dye piece comes with a 3-part stamp. So I'm going to layer 3 different colors of embossing, and then we are going to make a really cool, clean and simple card for our masculine set. So I've already powdered the paper and I'm stamping with VersaMark. The first layer that I'm going to do, I'm going to go darkest to lightest. So this is the biggest layer, and I'm going to use some navy embossing powder to kind of match with everything else that we have. So I'm going to emboss this. When you're embossing in layers, you do want to let things cool off and give it a little time in between. So what I'm doing in the video will be sped up, but I did allow probably 20 minutes in between each layer just to make sure the paper had cooled off and that I wasn't going to cause any problems with that. Once again, I'm going in with this little teeny tiny paintbrush and looking and seeing if I've got any stray pieces, because navy is definitely going to show up on this white, so you want to make sure you've got it all cleaned up and that it's only the image that you're embossing. When I use a heat tool, especially this is going to be my front panel, I'm not die cutting anything, I rotate between the front and the back of the paper, partly to keep from blowing off the embossing paper or powder, but also because I don't want my paper to warp too much. So I'm going to get this taken care of, and then I heat on the back and try to keep the paper as flat as possible, because I'm going to be doing this multiple times and I don't want a super warped piece of paper. So for my second layer, I'm getting the stamp lined up. This has 3 layers to the stamp. So for our second layer, we're going to do the gold embossing. You want to powder everything really well because that other embossing powder is a little sticky, and you just want to keep your project nice and clean because we're going for that clean and simple look. So I'm applying a lot of powder with my powder tool, and then I'm going to stamp with VersaMark and we'll gold heat emboss this. I sped this up so that you could see, but I usually do 2 layers of VersaMark every time I'm doing this. And I'm just making sure that I get it good and pressed down. And then I'm going to pull this up and spread my powder on. So once you've put your powder on, you still need to look and make sure you don't have any straggly areas that you need to cover. So here's what it looks like with the gold. I think that looks really cool, and I'm going to make sure I also usually tap the powder on at least twice just to make sure I've covered everything. And now I'm looking at this and we're going to go heat emboss it. So I'm doing that same thing, heating on the top, heating on the bottom. You don't want to overdo it on this because you've already got some embossing powder that's melted, so you just want to get it to the right spot and then stop and get ready for your next section. My last one is the smallest of the stamps, and I'm lining this up. I'm going to add my powder, and we're going to stamp it twice with VersaMark. Then we're going to heat emboss with the antique silver from Altenew. So I'll show you how that looks, and we'll finish this card up. So we did 3 layers of heat embossing on this, and I just think it looks amazing. So we did the navy, the gold, and then now the silver. Looks really pretty. So I've got this plain white front, and I decided I'm going to add some metallic watercolor as splatter. I love the Altenew metallic watercolor pans. I use it for splatter all the time. I haven't done much painting with it, but it makes a beautiful splatter. I love having splatter on my card. I feel like it just breaks up that white a little bit. So I'm just going to do some metallic gold and very small splatters around it just to add that extra little bit of sparkle. And this Altenew metallic watercolor really does a great job of sparkling. It's amazing how little you have to use, and it just gives it such a pretty look. All that's left to do with this card is the sentiment. I did mount this paper on a piece of navy so that I've got that as a little border around the edges, and then I'm using this die set, and I'm just keeping everything so you can punch out the happy birthday and put a different color in there, but I like it all as one metallic piece. So I'm going to put this on the bottom of my card, and I'm using my T-ruler to keep it straight, line that up, and then this card will be finished. For some reason, I think this might be my favorite in the set. I just really love the clean and simple look, and I love that heat embossing. So there's the final card. We're going to move to the next one. So with this, we're going to make a pattern on this background of the tie-dye, and I'm going to have a lot of elements on this card, but I want to use some really light pencil marks, mark my center, and figure out what I'm going to do for this pattern. So I want one in the center, and then I'm just going to see how I can fill in around that. I'm going to only use a portion of this background, but I'm going to stamp the whole thing so that if there's one area that I like better, that I can cut that portion and have it as my background. Using that same Gina K in the navy ink that matches the Gina K in the navy cardstock that I'm using with this. So I am just stamping something that will match perfectly with the cardstock. So let's start this pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and erase my lines because what I was doing is setting up my center, but I don't really need measurements for the rest. I'm just going to fit the other pieces around, and I'm usually pretty good at eyeballing that. Altenew sells these great erasers. I love this eraser. It does such a great job. You would think that you would still end up with a mark on your white paper, but you do not. So I'll make sure to put that in the description of some of the things that I used in this video. So I'm going to speed this up even more just to kind of show you the pattern and how I made it. I wanted to keep this just the same size of this. You know, it comes, the tie-dye ones come in 3 different sizes, but I wanted to keep this background. To me, it's more geometric and it looks more masculine to have them all the same versus really crowding the background. So I added these all over, and then I'm going to use a portion of this for my card. So this is going to be what the top half of the card looks like. The bottom half, I'm going to get a piece of navy cardstock, and we're going to heat emboss in gold with some of those same stripes we've used on the previous cards. I am powdering this like crazy. This powder tool is amazing at how much will come out. I know it always used to freak me out to powder a dark colored cardstock this much, but you really need to powder it this much to keep your gold and heat embossing where it's supposed to be. So this will come off, and I'm going to show you how I get it off. So I'm going to go ahead and do my next couple of stamps and get this ready to heat emboss. And look at how beautiful that stuff comes off. I don't even have to dust anything off because I did so much powder. So I go in and heat emboss my first 2 sections. I'm still going to add some more stripes, but I just kind of get worried that I'm going to accidentally knock off some of the heat embossing powder as I'm messing with my MISTI. So I usually do about half the page, and then I'm going to go back and do the rest. We probably won't need all of that, but I didn't know if I was going to add this to another card as well, so I decided I'd go ahead and finish out the embossing. I've already got the powder there, and I may as well finish the whole panel. Let me show you how I got the embossing powder off. I just took a microfiber cloth and gently rubbed on the whole thing. If there was an area that had more, I'd rub a little bit harder and switch up what I was using, and all of this came off and looks beautiful. So you just got to spend a little time with your microfiber towel and rub the areas, and it comes off just fine. I'm going to cut my sentiment out of some gold foil paper. I love this paper, and it's matched everything. Well, you know, we've been using this all along. So I'm going to cut out the big happy, and I'm going to attach it to 2 pieces of white cardstock just to help it stand up a little bit and have a little bit more dimension. This is going to be a happy anniversary. So I used the anniversary and I heat embossed it on that same in the navy cardstock. Did lots of powder, got it heat embossed, and now I'm wiping this off. We're going to add this in the middle of the sentiment and put the card together. I'm going to use a little bit of foam tape behind the navy strip because that happy, remember I added several layers to it, so it sticks up a little bit further than what the navy does. So I'm just going to cut myself a couple of squares, and I'm going to put this on the navy piece. I know I've got this upside down, but I wanted you to see how I adhered it. So I'm going to do 3 pieces of foam tape from my roll and just add them on the back, and then we'll put glue on the back of the happy, and we'll get this all pressed down, and it'll be a little bit raised off that cardstock. So you can see what it's going to look like. I'm going to get the glue on there. For my card panel, I created a card base out of the navy cardstock, and then I mounted my back panel and part of the panel that I made with embossing. So it's kind of got a third of the embossing panel and maybe 2/3 of the other thing, and then we're going to put this happy anniversary kind of at the border of where those two meet. It's going to look so beautiful. Really love it. Well, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video as much as I did making it. I enjoyed having you on the channel so much. Make sure if you hadn't done it yet, you hit the subscribe and like button. I will link everything used in this video in the description. That will have links to the products, and those give me a small commission. Those commissions do not affect your price at all, so no cost to you. If you are going shopping today, I would love for you to click through those. They help me more than you can imagine. So I really appreciate it. I hope everybody had a great time, and I hope to see you again on the channel soon. Have a great day. Bye.